Bob Brown. I currently live in Cary, North Carolina, outside of Raleigh. I was born in Red Bluff, California. That's up in Northern California near Redding. When I was about 5, we moved to Stockton, which is in San Joaquin Valley, Central Valley. I was raised there, did a lot of hunting and fishing. We had boats of one sort or another. There's a lot of waterways between Stockton and San Francisco. So every weekend, except during hunting season, we were out on the water doing something, fishing usually, but also deer hunting, pheasant hunting, waterfowl hunting, that kind of thing. But I worked for a dog and cat veterinarian when I was in high school, and so I wanted to be a dog and cat veterinarian. So I started out at the University of California at Davis. Had a pretty good time my first couple of years, and didn't flunk out or anything, but it was clear I was not going to be a veterinarian. I got very interested in a course I took in feeds and feeding, animal feeds and feeding, nutrition basically of domestic animals. And so I decided to transfer to Colorado State University. They were the only school in the country, may still be, that had a bachelor's degree in animal nutrition. And so a lot of biochemistry, a lot of physiology, a lot of different nutrition courses. But I did both an internship and later a summer job working at their Foothills campus. It was just off the campus there, where they did the nutritional work. And they worked on everything from house cats to dairy cattle and goats and deer and elk. And the project I was working on had to do with water turnover in mule deer. It was an isotope study. And anyway, I got really interested in the concept of wildlife nutrition. And I kind of looked around when it was time for graduate school, and hardly anybody was doing that kind of work. So I applied to a number of graduate schools. I think I got assistantship offers from 5, but one of them was Penn State, which had a deer nutrition program in their animal science department. I also had thoughts of going into the Peace Corps, but unfortunately I was graduating in 1968, so I ended up in the Marine Corps. And went 3 years in the Marine Corps, went to Vietnam, got shot up, came home, and went back to Penn State. What I found, or what they found, they said, you know, actually my senior project, I was a co-author with my advisor in a Journal of Wildlife Management publication. So they said, you know, most of the students we get in nutrition have general animal science degrees, but not actually nutrition degrees. You've had a lot of nutrition. I took 2 or 3 graduate courses while I was a senior. Had a paper that was published, and they said, you know, we've never done this before, but you can go straight through for a PhD without a master's degree. And so then I looked at this is Bob Cowan was my advisor there in the animal science department, and he was in charge of a deer pen facility they had with about 200 whitetails. And I looked at the practical stuff they were doing on what deer ate, how well they digested, and so forth, and I thought, well, that's interesting, but I know how to do that stuff. I've done it on domestic animals and all as an undergraduate. And then they fiddling around with the concept of the physiology of antler growth, and could that be applied to something, knowing the hormones involved and that kind of thing. I said, well, that's what I found interesting. And so my doctoral dissertation, after 4 years, was on the endocrine control of antler growth in deer as a model for osteoporosis in elderly women. And so then I thought I really shot myself in the foot now. I was graduating. I had never had a course in wildlife, but I'd worked on deer. But I worked on deer, and all my courses were in nutrition and domestic animals. So I thought, I'm not going to be able to get a job anywhere. And so what happened is I had 2 job offers. One was for a postdoc in Canada working on human nutrition, actually elderly women and osteoporosis. And the advisor there said, we rarely get somebody who knows both nutrition and endocrinology. So he offered me a job. And the other was a teaching job at Texas A&I University in Kingsville, Texas, and teaching nutrition courses. And having gone through 4 years like that, my first child was born, my dad passed away. It was a pretty intense 4 years for my graduate work, and so I was kind of burned out on research. So I took the teaching job in Texas. Got down there, I was teaching 4 courses a semester on a 9-month contract, and teaching another 4 in the summer. So I took my dissertation and wrapped it up and sent it off to the National Institute of Health. And for the next 12 years, I got about $250,000 a year from NIH. I mean, it was reviewed every 3 years and so forth, but basically, they funded my biomedical research on the hormonal control of antler growth. And so once I had my lab set up there, we had to build deer pens from scratch, go out and catch fawns, raise them up, and start producing deer. After I got that up and running, then I also had just a practical research career. I worked with wildlife biologists who was there, Charlie DeYoung. I worked with the range folks who were doing range stuff on competition between all the exotics we have in Texas, Nilgai antelope and Sika deer and axis deer, javelina. And so I got to work on all those with animals in pens. We went go out and catch them, try and tame them down, put them in pens, and build digestion crates for them and that sort of thing. And so I had a dual research career for 12 years there, doing the biomedical work for NIH and doing the practical wildlife nutrition. And I got out of my 4-course a semester teaching load, and about once a year I teach a graduate course in wildlife nutrition and physiology. So that's basically how I got going in it. Later I became the Southwestern Section representative for the Wildlife Society. That was Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. And then I was elected president. Actually, some of you from state may know Dick Lancia. I ran against him for president. He won. I lost by 8 votes. And the next year I ran against somebody else who I won. So he and I worked together for about 4 years on council there. And that's when the society was going through some tough times. We actually had to let go the CEO who'd been there 25 years. And that was a very stressful thing in that because of the legal ramifications, we couldn't tell anybody why we were letting him go. And the previous presidents wrote us letters. A lot of the membership raise came with us, and we just had to say, trust us, we're doing this right for good reasons. And at the same time, the society's membership had been going down. I think we were down below 8,000 or so, and so we made the decision, along with council, to eliminate the Wildlife Society Bulletin, which was very popular at the time, and replace that with a magazine that everybody would get. You only got the bulletin or the journal if you paid extra. And again, we took a lot of heat for that, but over the next few years, the membership went back up past 10,000. We now have the bulletin back as an online journal, and of course now you get all of it for free if you're a member. So it worked out very well. I have never given management advice because I'm not a certified wildlife biologist. I've never had a course in wildlife, and I used to get a lot of calls when I was active working. And I'd give advice on nutrition, people want what to supplement with, or when to supplement, or not to supplement at all, and that sort of thing. I'd give them nutritional advice, but I said, look, I'm not a certified wildlife biologist. Actually, have never had a course in wildlife. Probably the only president of the Wildlife Society who had never had a course in wildlife. And so I never gave management advice. You can pick up a lot of it, obviously, on your own, just being around wildlife for 30 or 40 years, but I wouldn't give advice on that. Yeah, well, my advisor was a good man. He was actually Bob Cowan at Penn State. He was my advisor. He was actually a forage guy, a sheep and goat guy, and somehow got stuck with this deer business, but he was very good and very professional and very knowledgeable. The next one is when I got into the Wildlife Society, and I was also, there's an organization of all the wildlife and fisheries academic departments around the country, the National Association of University Fish and Wildlife Programs, NAFWAP or something like that. The foresters have a very similar organization. And so I became president of that. Well, we actually like to lobby in Washington, D.C. on those kinds of legislation and funding bills that affected wildlife in general. And so for one thing we did is we lobbied a lot on the co-op units, their funding from year to year. And also when Secretary Babbitt in the Interior took all their scientists and put them under the USGS, well, we were really concerned about how the biologists were going to be treated. And so we lobbied a lot there. And so we hired part-time a lobbyist, Larry Yon. Now, Larry Yon was the president for many years of the Wildlife Management Institute. He won the Leopold Award from the Wildlife Society. He's dead now, but he was absolutely one of the most highly thought of and most ethical people in Washington, D.C. And he knew everybody, he knew how to get around. He'd call me, and he didn't have a computer. in those days. And so he called me and said, we need to write a letter to so-and-so about such and such. And he said, I'll write the letter for you and send it to you. You sign it, send it in. As I matured some, I said, I want to write the letter. I'll send it to you. If it looks okay, then you can send it in for me. I go to Washington. He showed me around various places. One time, I remember I took one of my sons, probably my oldest one, 42 now, but at the time he was maybe 12. And so I took him around to show him some of the stuff in Washington. And then Larry on would take us around and to meet legislators, congressmen, senators, and we got to ride the underground trail thing that takes you between the various buildings in Washington. And we were in the chief of the Forest Service office. And I think it was Mike Dombeck at the time. And we were sitting around there, and Alex was sitting over in the corner. And here were 4 or 5 of the top forestry and wildlife people in the nation discussing whatever the issue was. Somebody looked over at Alex and said, Alex, did you ever think this is what wildlife biologists do for a living? And he kind of grinned, and I said, well, some of us have to do this so the rest of them can actually do their real job out there in the field managing wildlife. So we're here to try and take care of the stuff they don't want to do. So that's kind of how I got into it and got into the kind of the administrative part of it. Well, there's a lot of advice, I guess. The main thing is obviously you've got to do well in your studies, pay attention. If you can develop as a personal relationship as much as you can with at least one faculty member. If it's 2 or 3, that's so much the better. If you've done a special problems under one of them, or maybe done an internship of some faculty, so there's somebody there, hopefully more than one, but at least somebody at that university who knows you. So when it comes time to write a letter of recommendation, it's not just one of these form letters. You know, this person graduated, they had such and such a degree, they belong to the Wildlife Club, they're great, hire them. No, this person I know is an ethical person. That I can give a specific example. One time they worked all weekend on something and they didn't have to, or they volunteered for something. Somebody can really write a good letter for you. That's part of it. The other is to try and get as much experience as you can. It always looks good if you've been an officer in the student club, that kind of thing. If there's any way you can take anything you've done, again, an internship or a research project in some professor's lab or field site, or a part-time job where you can take that and publish it somewhere, whether it's just giving a paper at the state chapter meeting or get an article in a magazine even, not necessarily a journal. That shows that you've got an expertise that others don't have. If you can write, or you can get up in front of a group and speak. I often would tell students, what do you think is the most important class you're going to take in college? And they say, oh, basic biology or chemistry or first course in wildlife science. And I say, no, it's public speaking or English. You've got to be able to write. You've got to be able to get up in front of a group and speak. I said, how many of you know somebody in high school that was just full of BS, but they were really good at it, and they could convince people of things, but it was all bull. And everybody knows that kind of person. I said, well, if you're not full of bull, but you can speak and you can write, you'll be very, very successful in life. So that and again, getting as broad experience as you can. Even if we find students, it's been said today in the meetings, you might get your master's degree working on chickadees, and you might end up being a bear biologist. So that's one of the fascinating and interesting things about wildlife is you work on so many different things, or that you potentially could, and yet that's a restriction sometimes. People kind of close themselves in. I've hired people, university faculty, who were being hired for one thing, but their doctoral work was in something else, but maybe they had a little experience with this one thing that put them ahead. And I've had students the same thing, where because they took a course or two in GIS, or they took a course in instrumentation where they knew how to use laboratory instruments or something, they got a job that other people wouldn't get. That had similar degrees, similar grades, and so on, because that one thing is something that nobody else had. Wow, there's been so many different interesting things. Again, I told you about my research stuff, and it was always a challenge in that I was trying to keep up with what was going on in both practical wildlife management in Texas and in this highly technical biomedical field of endocrinology and human bone growth and all that sort of thing. So that was always a bit of a challenge. as I got into administration, I think one of the joys of it, in academics there's two types of joy. One is the teaching, because you see the impact immediately. When the students take their final exam, hopefully most of them do well, some of them won't, but the ones that do well, you see, gosh, I had an impact on them, or I advised them to go to graduate school or whatever, and mentored them in some fashion, and it has a very short-term, immediate satisfaction, whereas the research stuff, from the time you get the idea till you get the funding, till you hire the student, till you get the publication out, is a period of years. That's more of a long-term thing. And in administration, it's a similar thing, that you try and hire a young faculty member and mentor them the best you can, set them up the best you can, and hopefully 90% of them will do really well and become good at what they do. And so that's very rewarding. The people part is probably the most rewarding, rather than any publication I had or any specific research project I worked on or anything of that nature. Is seeing people do well. Firing people. There's sometimes you just have to swallow the bullet and do it. And I've had a couple of instances where I had to literally fire a faculty member. One was tenured. It took 7 years to get rid of that guy. I gave him poor evaluations. His students gave him poor evaluations. The tenure promotion, but he'd been tenured. Gave him the tenure promotion committee poor evaluations for 7 years, and that's how long at that university it took to get rid of a tenured faculty member. Later, after he left, we cleaned out his office for him. We found drug paraphernalia, and so there was an answer to why he did so badly and all sorts of things, because he was a really bright guy and was originally hired and extremely successful until he got tenured, and then for some reason he apparently developed a drug habit and went downhill fast. And there were a couple other times where I had to deny tenure to someone and let them go. Another time it was an extension person who wasn't tenured, but both of them were, I would say, not totally mentally stable, and they were gun collectors. And literally, each time, the day they left, part of it is the legal aspect as to how you have to do it. You have to call them in without telling them what it's for in advance, and just hand them the paper and give me your keys, sort of thing. It's awful the way the legal beagles make you do it. But I literally had law enforcement people in the building when we did that. It was that scary. Actually, a low point, a low point was lower in that somebody tried to, well, I was tenured, they tried to fire me. I won't go into the institution, but we had a change in leadership. The guy was an absolute jerk and failure and treated people very poorly, brought them in under false pretenses, worked them to death for a year or so, and then fired them. And I was a leader in getting people to sign, and it was set up so we were not allowed to evaluate the supervisor. And I led a program or kind of a rebellion where we passed around a petition of everybody there to ask that we could evaluate this person. And they knew I was one of the leaders, and it got really ugly for a while. Eventually this person had several lawsuits against him, and not one of mine, but there were all kinds of complaints against him, and he lost his job before I did. So that was far and away the low point. High points, I'd never had a ladder to climb. I never thought about that. I just kind of enjoyed year to year. And when I was in Texas, Kingsville, Texas, somebody called from Mississippi State and said, hey, we need a department head, would you think about applying? Same thing when I was at Mississippi State, I got a call from Texas A&M, would you think of applying for, and the same thing at becoming the dean at NC State. I never had a plan. I know people who do, people who wanted to be university presidents or whatever, and no, I just kind of take it as it comes, and hope, serendipity, if things don't work out, I'll do something else, or I would be totally happy to be a wildlife nutritionist in Kingsville, Texas still, It wouldn't have bothered me if I never left there. So the high points were being asked to move up and do different things. Well, there are probably a lot of those. As I said, I work with a lot of different critters, white-tailed deer, axis deer, cycad deer, bobwhite quail, javelina, And we got into trying to study nilgai antelope in Texas. I got a lot of, there were like 40,000 of them roaming around South Texas. The stories that they were either let loose from a traveling show or a zoo or something, or were actually purposely imported onto the King Ranch, the first 10 of them or something. Anyway, there were thousands of them. And I don't know if they looked like an eland, but with short, sharp horns. And they call them blue bulls because they start out tan, and the females will stay tan, but the males turn, it's a grayish black color, it almost looks blue. That's why they call them blue bulls. And they can be mean as can be. There have been ranchers who've been gored by them. One of them attacked his tractor. So anyway, we're going to study these in pens. So first we had to build pens, like building pens for elephants. And I needed at least 6 to do nutrition trials and all. And we went out with cowboys and a helicopter. And the helicopters would chase one out of the brush, and the cowboys would rope them, put them in a van, put them in a trailer, and we'd haul them and put them in the pens. So we got them in there, and they got to where they were calm enough to be in the pens. Well, now I got to build digestion crates. I mean, just like with a deer and a javelina, you got to collect their feces and urine and know how much they ate and how much they drank. And they were big. They were 8 feet by 8 feet boxes with a fan to keep them cool, and a shed roof over the top, and really heavy-duty metal grating that they could stand on, and their feces and urine would go through. Well, how are we going to get them into this thing? And so the first effort was I had my students build some chutes, plywood chutes that go from their pen into this thing. Well, the first one that tried that, the chute just exploded. I mean, there was plywood and 2x4s flying everywhere. That one didn't work. Later we tranquilized one, and it took that's back before we had the light darts. We had the capture gun darts, and had to shoot it like 8 times to knock the darn thing down. And then you got an 800-pound animal to pick up and get into this crate. Well, I mean, we did that once, but wouldn't do it. Anyway, we ended up using a cattle trailer and starving the thing for a day or so, and putting some feed in there, and he walked in, and then we could move the trailer around. So that worked. But anyway, getting back to the time that the chute exploded, I had all my students out there. We were trying to get this thing into the work. And anyway, the chute exploded, and this bull comes out, and the deer pen's maybe the size of this room, maybe 80 feet by 40 feet or something, the pen we were in. And all the students jump up on the high fences around, and there's a mesquite tree in there. And I didn't think about it at the time. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt with a white t-shirt under it and blue jeans. That bull saw me as another bull and came after me, and so we got on opposite sides of this mesquite tree. And the weird thing about nilgai, when they fight each other, they drop down on their front knees and fight with their horns. You'll even see adults training the little ones to do that. The little calves will get down on their knees, and the big adult will get down on his knees and walk around, whap them around with the head. So anyway, this big guy drops to his knees and starts banging the tree, and we're going around the tree, and the dust is flying. All my students are laughing their heads off. They think this is pretty good. And so then I realized the blue shirt, and I ripped that shirt off and threw it on the ground, and that bull went after the shirt. Now I'm wearing a white t-shirt, so I climbed over the fence too. But that was funny now. It was not funny at the time. Wow. I think there could be a variety of things. Because not everybody contributes in the same way. In some cases, the person might just be really bright at statistics and mathematics, and maybe is kind of an introvert, but still can be a great wildlife biologist working in the right spot in the agency. Other folks are outgoing and personable, and maybe they didn't do that good in college. You know, there's an old joke about the professor telling the medical students, well, you A students will make the best researchers, the B students will make the best doctors, and the C students will make the most money. And so there's actually some truth in that. So you may have somebody who's very personable, and they make a great public relations person, they'll probably make a good biologist, probably make a great person to interact with the public. They may have barely gotten through college, but they're personable. And so it's a variety of things. Obviously ethics is absolutely essential, you know, and you don't have to be a star student, but you have to know what you're talking about. And that's the other thing. If you don't know what you're talking about, admit that and say, I'll ask somebody, you know. Don't BS people. You see a lot of that going around. Well, as was presented today by David Cobb, I don't know if it's more challenging than in the past. When you really look at some of the battles that were fought in the past, I'm not sure it's any more difficult today than it was in the past, like fighting market hunters and that kind of thing, or setting aside lands for refuges and the like. Those were huge battles back in the day, and now it's different battles. Part of it is funding for agencies, part of it is fighting something that you can't really predict well, which is climate change. You know it's going to impact things. People can model it, but until you actually see it happening, and then it's too late to do much about it, you know? And that's going to be, for the next millennia, probably fighting that. Right now, with a new president, we don't know what's going to happen as far as who runs what agency and that sort of thing. Our challenge, as always, has not been a wildlife management challenge, it's a people management challenge. How do we get the public involved and engaged and interested and knowledgeable? And again, as was mentioned earlier today, in some cases with the nature channels and so forth, Discovery Channel on TV, people are more interested and in some cases more knowledgeable. But they may be misinformed in some cases. And when it comes to things like I mentioned earlier, feral cats or shooting coyotes or trying to preserve, why do we spend so much money on endangered species and that sort of thing, it's hard to convince the public what the rationale is for that. And so, to me, the people issue is the biggest challenge for the future. No, other than it's been quite a ride for me. Again, it wasn't something I planned to get into, and it just I just feel like one of the luckiest people in the world. Just one good thing happened after another, and I see some folks. I've got a neighbor who's working on a finished a PhD in biology, and I know back when I was doing biomedical work, I'd go to these biomedical meetings, and there would be hundreds of PhDs in their second and third postdoc, you know, and it's just, to some extent, that's quite a tragedy that we don't have enough positions for the number of people who are not only interested, but talented and passionate about wildlife, but they can't always find jobs. And I tell people, well, you know, you can find some other job as long as you get a job, and make wildlife your avocation, whether it's hunting and fishing or being involved in Wildlife Society or Audubon or a docent at a museum or something. You can make your avocation where you get a lot of your personal satisfaction, and your job just funds that.